Our next session is taking a second look, reviewing existing records for more genealogical clues by Tamika Strong. And she's passed out her handout. Tamika graduated from Emory University with a Bachelor of Arts in African American Studies. She received a Master of Library and Information Science from the University of Pittsburgh and a Master of Archival Studies at Clayton State University. Mrs. Strong spent 15 years serving Georgia citizens as a librarian at the DeKalb County Public Library System and the Georgia Public Library Service. Since becoming an archivist more than 5 years ago, she assists researchers by connecting them to the vast resources available here at the Georgia Archives. Tamika?
All right, so hopefully everybody has a copy of the handout. And for those of you who have taken a session from me, you know that I produce more than I could probably cover in an hour. So we're going to do this, right? So let's see. All right. So we all have these. Whether you're starting, you've been in the game for about 20 years, you know, midway through it, we all have these. Sometimes working in archives, we have patrons to come in and they ask us questions. So there are days when we can get a person back to 1870, no problem, 5 minutes, because of ancestry, suggested records. You know, they were, where were they? Well, they showed up in the records, name was spelled properly, blah, 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 right? But then there are others who we can't even get to 1940, for whatever reason. So your brick wall might be closer to the current, to you than others, but it's still a brick wall. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to discuss reviewing records and how to extract genealogical relevant information from documents. Now, I don't know your experience in genealogy, so some of you might have more experience than others. And so we're going to tackle this as a group because that's what we as genealogists do. We become quote unquote family. So I'm going to treat y'all like family. I'm going to tell y'all a little bit about my family, and we're going to work on some problems together, okay? So we're also going to explore ways to chip away at the research problem, and that's where the methodology comes in. And I realized that I love methodology. I love trying to break down, you know, the project into small pieces and how can we do that? And then we're going to do, like I said, openly discuss scenarios to help you to read between the lines of the resources, okay? Things to keep in mind. So we know genealogy is a journey, right? So when you're going on a journey, you have to prepare for it. Sometimes that preparation is physical, sometimes it's mental. Sometimes it's even emotional, because there's some stuff you're going to uncover when you do this research that's going to take you someplace. And I do apologize for my very, I'm speaking to you guys like I talk to my friends, so please forgive me. And my bosses are sitting in the back, so hopefully they don't mind. But anyway, so when you are doing this journey, you have to do what you have to do, for the lack of a better phrase, to get your mind right, because it's going to take you someplace physically, mentally, and emotionally, because you're going to uncover some things that might be challenging. So just take some time to prepare for that. But remember, genealogy is not a marathon. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. So there are some of us who've been at this. I've been at it for about 16 years. There's still some things I have not uncovered yet that I'm right now feeling like I should know, but I don't know. But hey, we're in this together. It's a marathon. So we just need to take our time and be patient with ourselves, because what may not be here today, as Ms. Lynn mentioned, may be there tomorrow, because Ancestry, Family Search, and other organizations are digitizing records at record time. So what may not be there today, next week, or next month could be there next year. And it's okay if you don't know something. There's a lot of stuff I don't know, and I've been doing this for a very long, well, not very long time, but, you know, some years. So when you know better, you try to do better. So that's why continual learning is so important with genealogy, because new things are uncovered. So you have to then yourselves learn it. I'm always learning. I'm always reading stuff. I'm always, I have some of my group members, my monthly group members here, And they can tell you, I try things out on them. They let me know if it works. They let me know if it doesn't work. So it's good to have that feedback loop where you can try things out on people and they can give you that feedback. And like I said, take your time. All right. So like I said, I'm going to introduce you to members of my family. This is my Uncle Roy. He is my maternal grandmother's brother. He's the oldest of the two boys that my great-grandmother had. And so growing up, all I know, Uncle Roy, he was a minister. When he passed away, this was his obituary. So, you know, when you're doing research, right, you go looking for certain documents and you have this mental checklist where you're like, oh, I need obituary, I need I need a funeral notice, obituary, death notice, blah, blah, blah. Check, 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 right? So what do we do when we get it? You file it away. Well, some of y'all may just read it, but I typically will glance over it and then I'll file it away. So this is some of the things I did early on. So remember how long that obituary was, right? So I just checked it off in my head and put it in a notebook and downloaded it, and that was it. But guess what? Later on, I read it again. So these red boxes are actually some of the clues that popped up. And you may not be able to see this in the back, but I'm going to read some of it. So he was a student at ITC. He supported himself working at night as a manager at Hoggebrooks Funeral Home. Hoggebrooks is still in existence. So I knew about the funeral home business. So he actually started one with his brother, and he was instrumental in helping to start Willie Watkins. So our family has a long-standing relationship with the Willie Watkins Funeral Home. He was also a singer. I knew he could sing because we had heard him do it. I didn't know he was a recorded artist. I didn't know he had a singing group, and I didn't know he actually has his music is actually on YouTube. So that is something I can share with my family. He also was a DJ. He worked at 3 radio stations. Did not know this. This man literally was in a household. I'm sitting there. How did we not know this? He displayed his singing talents at Wheat Street Baptist Church, historical Black church down on Auburn Avenue in Atlanta. He also was affiliated with Hillside Truth Chapel and Truth Center. He actually married the previous minister there, Barbara King. So I knew about Aunt Barbara and everything like that. And, you know, they got a divorce or whatever. But I knew about some of that. But what I didn't know was his culinary chops. I don't think I ever had that peach cobbler that they're talking about in this on obituary. So I'm kind of upset about that. But I didn't know he had his own business, the Harvest Lunchroom on Auburn Avenue. So all of these tips, him being a funeral home director, he was a business owner, business records. His other business, Harvest Lunchroom, Auburn Avenue. I need to look at city directories so I can figure out where it was so I can do, you know, we like to walk in the footsteps of our ancestors, right? I'm on Auburn Avenue all the time. I may have passed it, didn't even know. So that's a story that I can share. Like Lynn talked about sharing stories with her family. That's something I can share with mine. The churches. Maybe I can go to the archives of the various churches to see if there's any mention of my uncle in them. And then the radio stations. That's another clue. So sometimes we get these documents, we get them because we're so happy we found them. We just put them away. Another example. And that's a summary of some of the stuff that I was sharing. Can you guys see past this flag? Is the flag in the way? Okay, good. All right. This is the death certificate of my maternal third great-grandfather, Dan Harris. And he is one of my enslaved ancestors, possibly enslaved ancestors. And so I was actually doing a presentation and I'm on the hunt for my elusive last slaveholder, right? So the attendee said, what about the birthplace, Walton County? Now, mind you, I don't looked at this document 50 million times and I'm still trying to figure out where they were, right? So I'm looking at Morgan, just looking at all those documents, and he said Walton County. Why didn't I realize that I need to also look in Walton County? Because I had tunnel vision. So I was so happy to find this document. I didn't take the time to really decipher it. I didn't take the time to go through and basically transcribe this whole document, because even preparing for this, I saw at the top where it says length of residence in city and town. Yes, 6 months. No, 6 years. That's a time frame. That lets me know when he moved to the city, possibly. So that's a clue I didn't even see until I was preparing for this. So that lets you know that even though you've been doing this for a long period of time, even if you think you have it down packed, that you know how to analyze documents, sometimes you still have to look at it multiple times. Because sometimes where we are in our research and where we are with our focus, we may not even see it. We may be blind to it. So sometimes you have to review things over and over and over. So of course I found it, checked it off my list, filed it away, but we know that there's other information that's on there that we really need to pay a lot of attention to. Of course, I always look at the informant because I want to see if that's the connection. So I know the informant, I know where he's buried. I don't know exactly where in Chestnut Hill he's buried, but I know where he's buried. And so there's some other information on this document that helps me to take down clues and have some other things to consider. This one, and I realized when I put all these examples together, I said, I got a lot of death examples up here. But you know what? Death records are sometimes the most fruitful ones, because even with recent ones, you get all of the survivor information. So there's a lot of information you can glean from that. So this one actually helped me to break down a brick wall and identifying the father of my grandfather, my great-grandfather on my grandfather's side. And so I was looking for him. His name is John Maddox. John Maddox is a common name, of course. And I was trying to figure out who his parents was, who his father was. Because I thought it was a Troop Maddox, but I was like, something's not sitting right, because I was preparing to go to Alabama. I think I was going to Sanford when it was in Alabama. No, IGHR when it was at Sanford in Alabama. And I was like, I'm probably going to go to the Family History Center that's in Birmingham, because at the time they were the place where you can get all the death certificates from Alabama. So I was like, let me just prepare for this research trip. So something said, you know, that little small voice that always kind of taps you on the shoulder or whispers in your ear. I promise you I'm not crazy. I'm sure some of y'all had this experience too. If you haven't, I'm sorry, but I promise you I'm not crazy. But a small voice said, look at this obituary again. So what I did was I made a list of all the names. And so some of these names are actually the siblings of her father. This is his daughter. So I went looking for the combination of all these names and I actually found them. So of course, the first time I got this, I tucked it away. But after further examination, I actually found the parents. And Andy Trimble actually showed up in Atlanta too. So the names that were listed as survivors, as the aunts and uncles, gave me the clue to help me break the brick wall to get back one more generation. So what's the moral of this story? Stop, look, and listen. I just came up with that, so I'm really happy about it. So stop. Take time to read the record. Take time to read the record. Look. Transcribe the record. Transcribe it, because I promise you, when you look through it, you're not going to get everything. Transcribe it. Write down everything that you can pull out of it. Listen. Make a list of all the genealogical clues from the record. Now, granted, depending upon where you are with your knowledge about records in the particular research location, you may not see it right away because you're not aware of it. But later on, when you know better, you do better. You find out what resources are available. So 5 steps. You have these 5 steps, I think, for the most part, on your handout. But when you're dealing with your brick walls, think about it from a project standpoint, okay? So what is your goal? What is really your brick wall? Let that be your research question or your goal. What's your research subjects? Who are they? Are they a whole family? Is it an individual? Write down everything you know about that person. Write it down and pull together all the documents about that person. Now, I am a thrill of the hunt type of researcher. I love typing in names and going down rabbit holes and following those bright, shiny objects. But when you get to this point, you have to do what I tell researchers. You're at the point where you have to go over everything with a fine-tooth comb. You have to dot every I. You have to cross every T. You have to become methodical. So I'm like, I don't want to write down all this stuff. It takes too much time to do timelines and everything like that. But guess what? You're probably at that point where you have to spend that time to learn more about the research subject. So we'll look at timelines a little bit later. And it doesn't matter where you are in your journey. If you're at the beginning, middle, or end, these resources will hopefully help you with that. When I'm sitting down with researchers now and we're starting to do their research, one of the things I come up with is what I call the census checklist, because we typically as researchers, as archivists, we have a few minutes with you, maybe a few minutes, maybe some hours, depending on what's going on in the research room. So one of the things I try to do is I try to create a little checklist, and that kind of helps me to help you, because I get confused when you're telling me all this stuff. So I have to start writing stuff down so I can help you analyze it as well. And so we'll take a look at that too. But timelines are very important with this whole process, because you really want to have it written out. And so I know people like to use the genealogy software, you like to use Ancestry and everything like that, but nothing beats pen and paper. Nothing beats you writing it down by hand so that you can actually see the patterns, okay? So this is my second great grandmother, Maggie. My grandmother, Maggie Printup, is named for her. So this is what I knew about her starting out. Well, actually, I didn't know all this, but now I know it. So I'm just putting it there so you can see it. She was born in Morgan County to Eli Harris and Mary Jane Hamilton, or Hampton. She married twice in Morgan County. She had a total of 6 children. She moved to Fulton County. She died in Fulton County. So what do I know about her? What can y'all tell me? Just from this. What kind of records would I be looking for? That's one. What records? Death certificate, right? Probate records, right?
City directories.
Census, city directories, right? There's one that starts with a D. Is that other? Divorce. There you go. She had 2 marriages, right? So we might need to find a divorce record, because if he's still living, she's still living, they might have got divorced. So this is how I change that little summary of information into a timeline. This right here is what I consider a census checklist. And the reason why it's a census checklist is because of what? I'll tell me.
That's the U.S. Census records.
Right. So you see how I looked at her life range. So she was born in 1880. She died in 1942. So what's the most recent census we have available right now? 1950. So what I'm looking for is all the census records between her life range, right? And it turns out she actually was in 1880. She was born in 1880 and showed up in the 1880 census, or I would argue that that's her. So with this checklist, which is the beginning of a timeline, I have every census record that she should show up in. And I say should, because sometimes they're not there, or, maybe the enumerator didn't show up, or, all this other stuff. But that's where she should be, okay? Then on the side, I have the other dates. Now, I use the divorce as a little trick question, but 2 marriages, 1 divorce, birth of 6 children, and any important dates. So I know she moved from one county to the other, right? So I'm going to be looking for her in how many counties? 2 counties, right?
Some counties change.
Aha, good job. That's right. See, y'all learning from each other. Y'all heard what he said, right? Some counties change their boundaries. So a person could be living in the same place, but they could have 3 different addresses because the boundaries changed around them. So you actually gave away one of the scenarios. So good job.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to spoil.
No, you're good. You're good. This is awesome. All right. So there are 3 important factors when dealing with research. You got to know dates, because dates are very important. Location is very important. But then there's this other thing that's happening now with all of this digitizing records. You got to know where to look. So it's not just date and time anymore. You got to know where to look for them. Okay. So one caveat. I love this image. I'm going to use it in all my presentations going forward because I love blue anyway. But this is a great representation of what's available versus what's available online. So even though Family Search and other places may be digitizing records and they have like 125 million records added in 1 month, think about the totality of records that have been kept just from 1790 going forward. Like here at the Georgia Archives, we have over 90,000 cubic feet of records. So cubic feet, think of banker box. So y'all think about banker boxes, right? So think about 90,000 of those. Digitization is not cheap. There's no way we could afford to digitize everything we have in our collection. So what I tell researchers is to think about digitized collections as dangling carrots. So that's us teasing you, letting you know, hey, we got this, but guess what? We got plenty more in the 4 vaults that we have in this building. So first, what we're going to do is think about your location. Because as researchers, we have to become the subject matter expert for our research location. So state, maybe yours is not state, maybe yours is country. Maybe yours is, whatever, territory. Because before they became states, they were territories. Some of them anyway, or colonies. Yeah. So state is an umbrella term. So start wherever you have to start. But then counties or parishes or townships. Think about what are the other minor civil divisions, as the federal census calls them, for your particular research location. Then you want to look at the county creation dates. We talked about this already. Georgia has 159 counties. The last one started, I think, 1924, which was Peach. There's a lot of boundary changes in this state. We are the second state behind Texas with the most counties. We used to have 161, but 2 decided they were going to merge with Fulton County. So think about that. So all of those boundary changes, your person, like we said, could have been sitting in one spot, but over the course of census records, could have been in 3 different counties. They didn't move. They were sitting in the same spot, but because the boundary changed, their address, for the lack of a better phrase, changed. Is it a burned county? We have a lot of burned counties in the state of Georgia. That means that there may be, and I say may be, even though it burned, the records may not have been affected, but there are some record loss events in the state of Georgia. Does your county have one? That's something that you really need to figure out, because that's going to impact what records are available and when they're available. So you might have a marriage, the county may have started in 1808, but if they had a fire in 1865, the marriage records might start in 1865. So all of that time before is just lost. Or you would hope, well, probably, but anyway. Vital records. Vital records is important to what we do. However, the state of Georgia didn't start collecting them overall until 1919. We became a state in 1777. That's a long time not to have vital records, right? But there are some locations like Atlanta, Columbus, Macon, Savannah, and there's at least another one that started collecting these vital records at the end of 1800s. So like 1880s, 1869. But if you're not in those locations, looking for a birth record for a person who was born in 1907 in Brooks County, there won't be one because it doesn't exist. So that's why date and location is important, especially when it comes to vital records, because you got to know when they started collecting them in the municipality that you're researching. You also want to be familiar with the type of courts. So you're looking for court records, you got to know which court it is. So if I'm looking for state records, which court am I going to? Superior Court or probate court? Which one?
Probate.
Okay. So back in the day, probate court was what? You guys know? Court of the ordinary. Got it. There's another court, court of the inferior court. So there's different types of court systems in your research locations. So you have to learn about the different court systems so that you'll know where you need to go to look for these records. So if I'm looking for deeds in the state of Georgia, what court am I going to?
History. Oh, wait, you're not talking about
Superior Court.
Oh, Superior.
So deeds and mortgages, Superior Court. If you're looking for probate, estate records, marriage records, you're going to the probate court, which used to be the court of the ordinary. Okay. Is there a published county history or published information? There are a lot of researchers who came before us who spent the time, gathered the information, and they published them in books. We have a lot of those books downstairs. So you yourself have to figure out what books are available for your research locations, because they may not be online. It may just be sitting in a book. Yes, sir.
I just wanted to say, talking about vital records and like birth and death dates, one thing that I have actually found to be very helpful is Quaker records. If you had ancestors who are Quakers, because Quakers tended to keep very meticulous church records, and they would often contain things like birth and marriage records, the dates and the place and that sort of thing. So I just wanted to mention that.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. Yes, ma'am.
If I come to do some research, if I'm looking for probate, you'll actually pull the probate book off the shelf and let me thumb through it and look.
It depends. That's the whole where to look, because we have a lot of our probate records on Family Search. We have a lot of our probate records. We have mention of them in our virtual vault. There are some that are on microfilm. There are some that are physical, that are original documents. So it really depends. So it depends. If it's online or if it's on microfilm, we don't let you look at the physical, because you have access to the surrogate. But if the image is not good quality, we'll let you look at the original, or of course, if the original is the only source, that yeah.
You have to be so careful touching these old documents.
Not necessarily. You have to be careful. We don't want you flipping through them like it's a book. But no white gloves when you're touching documents. We do kind of sit in a room with you, because of course we have to, because we're babysitting the records. But we do ask that you respect the records, because we essentially are keeping these for not only us, but for future generations. So in order for them to live, you have to be gentle today. Okay. All right. So this is an example of me filling out that information that we just talked about for my great-grandmother, my second great-grandmother. So I'm only looking at one state, but I do have Alabama ancestors. So in their case, I'm looking at Alabama and Georgia. Okay. Counties, I'm looking at 2 counties. Some of your families, you might be looking at 5. So you have to become the subject matter expert for 5 counties. Sorry, but that's just the truth of the matter. Creation dates. I'm going to show you another slide that I saw from Dr. Abbott. I don't know if you're familiar with her, but she's a really great researcher. And I liked it, so I kind of copied it. So she is my inspiration, so I give her credit for it. But you always want to know what your creation dates for your counties are, so you know when they started and when the resources started. And you want to kind of know what their parent county is too. Because if they started in 1807, but you're looking for somebody in that same area in 1800, where are you going to go look? You're going to look at the the parent county, right? So instead of looking in Morgan, you're going to be looking in Baldwin. So that could possibly change the records. Is it a Byrne County? Neither one, Morgan or Fulton, is. Vital record dates. Morgan County didn't start early, so it's 1919. Fulton County, they started collecting births 1896, deaths in 1889. My family didn't move to Fulton County to 1920, so that really doesn't impact us, but that's something to keep in mind. And where are they located? Some of them are located online, like the death certificates for Georgia up to 43 on Family Search. And so anything after that is at Vital Records. So we talked about the types of courts: superior, probate, ordinary, inferior. And is there published county history or published information? There are several books. I can make a list of books for Fulton County as well as Morgan, but I have an example of one, which is Lynn Camp's Morgan County book, which is Arcadia Publishing. It was the Black America, Images of Black America. So it's a pictorial book. So that's just an extra slide. So this is, and I didn't update that, so my apologies. So just focus on the Morgan County one, ignore the Fulton County because this copy and paste went wrong. So this is the setup that I got from Dr. Abbott, where she had the creation date, the county seat, so that you'll know the county seat. the parent county, was there record loss? No. By the records dates, and you can write that. So it's just a great way to summarize the information that you have for your particular location. So where do you go to get this information? So if you're doing Georgia, I hate to toot our own horn, but the Georgia Archives is a must. You have to come here. We could on one level be a one-stop shop for you, because sometimes the counties don't even have it. They will send you back to us. So just reach out to us, ask us questions about what records we may have for your particular location. Virtual Vault, if you guys, well, let me ask, how many of you have played around with the Virtual Vault and you have Georgia Research? Okay, so how many of you have Georgia Research? And if you have not touched the Virtual Vault, shame on you. The Virtual Vault is a rich resource. It is basically the home of our digitized collections. And so you definitely want to take a look at them, especially our index to county records on microfilm, because that's where you're going to get the information about the county records we have on microfilm. And there's a trick to that as well. If you see the code SLC, that means that the Salt Lake City, i.e. Church of Latter-day Saints, actually work with us to digitize it. I mean, not digitize, but to microfilm it. And if they microfilmed it, there's a chance that it's on Family Search digitized. Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm. That's not true. Even though it's a burn, it could be a burn county, but there may be records. Like the last courthouse fire we've had in the state of Georgia was Hancock in 2014. They lost a lot of records because that day, for whatever reason, they left the vault door open. And so the records were destroyed. But between us, the archives, Family Search, and the public library, we still have copies of those records, some of which were able to be for what? There may be still a chance. I wouldn't say don't look, because you never want to leave a stone unturned. So you still want to see what kind of records are available. You never know. Yes, ma'am. Yeah. Right. Mm-hmm. Right. Was there a question? Yes, sir. Right. Right. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. Right. Right. So yeah, so wow. So that's something to keep in mind, because just because it's a burn county or there may have been a record of loss event, you still look, because you never want to, don't take my word for it. Go look it, because I might be confused, or, I may not have all the information about a particular location, but still go look. That's why you have to become the subject matter expert for your research location. Yes, Ms. Lynn.
In the virtual vault, can you search?
It depends. We have at least 19 records that are keyword searchable. 19 collections that are keyword searchable, but then the rest of them are browsable, meaning sort of kind of like the browsing collection on Family Search, where you have to look at the individual list. So yeah, it's a combination of the two. So it's both. All right. Yes, ma'am. You want to check with the Georgia Archives to see what we have. So I would say roughly up to about the early 1900s, we have records, but some counties didn't send us stuff. Some counties, put them in their own archives. So have to look everywhere. So that's why it's important to know where to look. So that's why I say start with us, but I would still take those research trips anyway, because I just did that with my husband for his birthday. So we spent a week going to Gwinnett and Fulton County. So it was fun because you get out and you get to see what they actually have, because you just never know. Like we're going to talk a little bit about the different locations and everything, repositories, but it's always important to do two things. Check to see if they have an online presence, look at their website. But then if you have the ability to go on site, because even though, you know, you might have an idea, oh, it's a probate court. We went to the Walton County probate court. I didn't realize they had bound volumes of newspapers sitting on the shelf. So you just never know until you walk through those doors. Okay. So this is a resource that's going to help you a whole lot. It's called the Family Search Research Wiki. And if you have not looked at it, please do. As you can see, it has over 100,000 articles, not only about research locations. Like if you didn't know anything about doing research in Louisiana, this is a good starting point. If you didn't know anything about Confederate records, this is also a good starting point because they have articles not only on record types, on record groups, they have locations, they even have how-tos. So if you have not played around with this, please take some time to do so because it is a very important resource. The Red Book, this is an old one, but it's still good. This one is available full text online. You can Google Red Book American Genealogy and pull it up. It's on Roots Web. So this is a fabulous resource to use. You also want to take a look at maps because, you know, when you're doing this research, sometimes we're looking at the text document. We can't really visualize how far away one location is from the other. So hopefully with every state that you're researching, you have a county map just so you can see what are the border counties from where your person was, because it could be a situation where you find them in 1920, you find them in 40, you can't find them in 30. You don't know where to look. You can create a circle to see what counties could they possibly be in, but you can also see the distance between the first location and their final destination. As in the case of my second great grandmother, they started in Morgan, but then made their way to Fulton County. All right, Big Ten. How we doing on time? So I have this thing about 10 resources. When does this end? Does it end at 11:45? I think so. All right, so we got time. You have on your handout the list of the 10, and it could be 12. It could be whatever, but I just say the Big 10 because these are the resources and institutions that for every research location you have, including every county level, you want this representation for. This is going to help you become that subject matter expert so you know where to look for these resources. So of course, we talked about ancestry, we talked about family search, so I'm not even going to deal with those two. We talked even about the state archives, so I'm not even going to deal with that one. County courthouses, we talked about that. County archives, Morgan County, one of my locations. I went to the courthouse and they told me that any records before a certain time are now at the county county archives, which is in the historic jail. So when I went to the Morgan County archives, I went to jail. So this is very interesting. So imagine hearing that the door, you know, it was a weird experience, but it was packed full of the records. And it's like, okay, I'm gonna focus on the records. I'm not gonna think about I'm in an old jail, but okay. But it was fun. And I still need to go back. So just think about that, because sometimes like Troup County has an archives as well. So the records you're looking for may not be at the courthouse. They may be at the archives, or they could be digitized and made available on Family Search, or they could be here. So that's why you got to think about where to look. So that's why I'm telling you about the Big 10. So you can go through this little checklist and make sure you look at all the repositories to see what records they have available. Genealogical and Historical Societies. GGS is our co-sponsor for this event. They are a big resource. They have resources that can help you in the different parts of the state to identify different organizations that can help you with your research. But then there are others. There is Coweta that has its own library. Some of these genealogical societies have their own libraries. So like the Brown House down in McDonough for Clayton and Henry counties, they have their own little house that has a huge library. I actually had an opportunity to go there, and I do apologize for talking so fast because I want to get through this because I really want y'all to talk to each other. So you have to make sure you know about these repositories or these institutions, because guess what? They have their boots to the ground. They are closer to where your ancestors live. So they may know some tips and tricks about how to find information in their research location. Public libraries. I'm a librarian first. have to promote them, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Academic special libraries, we'll talk a little bit more about that, as well as the other two, because I actually made slides for those. So this is what it will look like. So if I wanted to go through and kind of denote what type of information was available at the various locations or the different institutions, this is what it could possibly look like for you. This is just a summary. This is small. I had my genealogy group to do a location profile, and of course it was a running list. I have a colleague back here who has done one, and hers was extensive as well. And so you can put as much effort or little effort into this, but what you put into it is what you will get out of it. And I'm trying to practice what I preach because I'm still working on this myself. All right, so that's a little glance at what it will look like for the second group. But Genealogical and Historical Societies, this is the Georgia Archives website, the top part, but on the bottom, well, you scroll down, I had to separate it. We have what's called a Historical Organizations Directory. This is a good starting point to find out what types of organizations may be available for your research location. You can search by county, you can search by city, you can also search by the name of the organization. Public libraries, near and dear to my heart. If you're doing Georgia research and you don't know what your public library is, you are in luck, because GPLS, the Georgia Public Library Service, has a library directory. You can search by the system, you can search by county, by zip code, whatever the case may be. And they actually just revamped this. I'm really excited because it looks really, really good. So if you're looking for your research, the library, your research location, and you're doing Georgia research, this is the place to be. Pines. Pines is an initiative from GPLS, and Pines is actually the combined catalog, or Pines is a consortium of nearly all the libraries in the state of Georgia. So 51 out of I think they're at 60 systems are a part of Pines. There are over 300 member libraries. With the Pines card, you have access to over 10 million items. 10 million. You can't shake a stick at that. And there are libraries that are focused on genealogy throughout the state. So it's definitely a resource you want to take a look at. Additionally, if you're looking for materials that are located in these libraries, you cannot use WorldCat, because WorldCat, we're not a part of it anymore, we being Georgia libraries. So Pines and the local library catalogs are going to be what you need to use to find resources in those facilities. Special and academic libraries. So using my great-grandmother still as an example, Fulton County. If you're doing Fulton County and you're doing African American, Auburn Avenue, you have to go. That's one of the research locations. It's international African American research, but it's sitting here in Atlanta, and I know they have local resources because I know they have yearbooks amongst other things. But Atlanta History Center, Keenan Research Center. So that's another research facility that I need to check out, as well as the Rose Library at Emory University. They have the Hanley Bell Company funeral home records. So if you have a person and you realize, oh, they were funeralized by Hanley Company, guess where you need to go? You need to go to Emory because they have the records. So that's one of those things that you have to keep in mind. So I'm talking to you, bringing to you information that I have gathered over the course of 16 years. So it's okay if you don't know. But like I said, the more you learn, the more you know. When you know better, you do better, right? And so I'm just sharing all of this information with you. National Archives. We are fortunate to be right next door to one. You have to have an appointment now to go to the National Archives. But hey, if there are resources, federal level resources that are that you think that your ancestor may have, they're definitely the place to look at. But I also included the one for St. Louis, because St. Louis is the one that has the military records. So if you have somebody who served in the military, you need to reach out to St. Louis. Newspapers. Newspapers was the social media of our ancestors' day. So you can get all of their personal information. They was in everybody's business. Me and some colleagues were talking recently about how some of the early libraries, not libraries, but newspapers included. And I remember seeing newspapers from Macon that talked about the people who were discharged from the hospital and who were going into the hospital. And I'm like, holy crap, that's a lot of personal information, right? They didn't include what they were in the hospital for, but they just included the fact that they were going to the hospital. So I was like, this is creepy on one level, but it's awesome for us because we get all the juicy information, right? So please make sure to take some time to look for newspapers. For us, Georgia Newspaper Project, General gist of it, so Library of Congress put out a call and they wanted to do this national library newspaper. I don't know why I keep saying library. They wanted to do a national newspaper directory. And so they put out a call. So every state has one. So if you're researching different states, figure out which state or what location in your state is your newspaper project. Alabama, I think the state archives is their newspaper project home. So for us, it's the University of Georgia, so UGA. And so on their website, they actually have the microfilm holdings. They just recently changed their spreadsheet and added the county because it used to just be by city. So that's awesome. You can download it, you can sort it, you can play around with it. So please take advantage of that. And then they are working with the Digital Library of Georgia to digitize a lot of those records. So if you have, if you're interested in newspapers, you definitely want to look at Georgia Historic Newspapers so that you can see what newspapers they have available for your county. So going back to where to look. So on a more wider scale, this is a screenshot of Chronicling America. So this was the result of all that work where they pulled together the information from the newspaper projects. And this purple button here is awesome because with this button, you actually have access to all the newspapers that range from 1690 to the present. So you can figure out where they are. You can search by state, by county, even by ethnicity. So if you wanted to see, for instance, if I want to see all of the Black newspapers in Fulton County in Georgia, I can use this to help identify that. Then once I get that list, then I can look at Emory, I can look at UGA, I can look at the Georgia Archives to see whether or not they have copies of it so I know where to go look. One example of that is the Atlanta Independent. I don't know why I'm stuttering. The Atlanta Independent was a newspaper, Black newspaper at the turn of the century, so like 1900s. So there are some existing copies, and so we actually have it on microfilm. I know Emory has it on microfilm as well as some other places. So once you identify some of these records or resources, then go back to those institutions to see if they actually have them. Okay? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. They probably have it in that newspaper directory, but they don't have it digitized. So Library of Congress, the Chronicle in America does have some digitized newspapers on their website. However, they probably don't have as much as newspapers.com. Because like newspapers.com, the individual account for Atlanta Constitution with the publisher edition, you can get all the way up to like 2023. So for me, that is like a gold mine because Fulton County is one of my locations. And so I use that heavily. So speaking of other newspapers, so of course, there are ethnic newspapers. And so for African Americans, if you're doing research in Fulton County, Atlanta Daily World is going to be one of your resources because it also had birth announcements, it had death notices, it had information about when your ancestors may had a run-in with the law, like mine did. So you definitely want to look at that. And so ProQuest has historical Black newspapers, one of which is Atlanta Daily World. So you just have to reach out to academic institution or research institutions like Auburn. Auburn has a subscription to this. So that's why it's important to know your research locations and know what information they have available. And so sometimes the newspapers are not just on the local, not just on a statewide level, but it's also locally. So the Azalea Regional Library System, which is the library system where Morgan County is, has their own newspaper archives. You probably can't see it, but it's down here in the corner. So that's why it's also important to take a look at your public libraries because you never know what treasures they have available. So that's just a reminder of the Big Ten. On your handout is actually a little section where I have the lines open so you can actually start doing this when you go home. Yay. So all of that together, this is what her timeline now looks like. So I know where she was up to 1920. She was in Morgan County based on the census. So she was in Fulton County starting in 1930. So between 1920 and 1930, I know there was a big move from one location to the other. So one note about this is you got to think about urban versus rural. Urban locations will have more resources. So Fulton County, we talked about Atlanta Daily World, we talked about city directories, we talked about the repositories. Morgan County may not have that, but we can also look at Text Digest, but Text Digest may not be helpful when it comes to females because mostly the males are listed, but there are some females listed as well. So Text Digest is another one of those records that will get you in between the census so you can track down your ancestor. But then there's a list of other records. So sometimes when you're looking at your research question, you start thinking about, what do you know? If you don't know it, then where can you go to get the information? Do your location profile so that you can have an idea about what repositories you need to go to uncover these records. But then sometimes you want to think about, what records don't I have? But then sometimes you got to go looking for it anyway, because I didn't think that she had a divorce record. I just started playing around. I kind of figured out the time frame of when she possibly got divorced, and guess what? Sitting down in Morgan County Archives, didn't anticipate it, but I found it. So that was something I was not anticipating. But then there is one more resource that we have not talked about officially, but we kind of hinted at it. The other resource is each other. In this room is probably over 100 years of genealogy research experience. So when you're in these groups, and of course, you know, we're on the end of COVID, take the time to get to know each other, figure out what people know. Because one of the things we do in our genealogy group is we always talk about, say our name, and we say where we're researching and the surnames, because you never know. You could be, like Lynn talked about, sitting in a room with one of your cousins, and y'all need to have that conversation so you can figure out where you guys intersect. So in the last 5 minutes, because I don't want to hold you guys up from lunch, because you know you don't want to stand in between people and food, we're going to talk about scenario. So this scenario is, my ancestor was born in 1888 in Beckley County, Georgia. She moved to Fulton County, Georgia sometime in the 1920s and died there in 1940. So essentially, this is my second great grandmother. She got married, and her husband had 5 children. I just changed the number. They owned their own home, they owned their home in Fulton County, and her husband preceded her in death. What are some records that will help me learn more about this branch of my family? Obituary. Mm-hmm. Deeds, wills, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. County courthouses. Possibly school records. True. Yep. Mm-hmm. That's true. Very good. Yep. She probably died too early to have one, but that's also something to consider too. All right. Mm-hmm. With the marriage, go ahead.
One draft cards in for two, like maybe for a husband or one of kids
Mm-hmm.
or two.
Absolutely. One thing about marriage records too is, I think for the state of Georgia, in my experience, they really started collecting the applications roughly about 1920. So when you go looking for the marriage record, make sure to ask for the application, because that's going to tell you all the juicy stuff, like if they were married before, and if they weren't married before, how was that marriage dissolved? Was it, and then what was the reason? And that could be kind of funny. And that will send you to another record. So if you're looking for a divorce record in Georgia, what court are you looking at? Does anyone know? Mm-mm. It's Superior. Yep, Superior Court. All right. Looking for a marriage date for a couple. They lived in Jasper County. Well, I messed that up, so I was focused on that. But anyway, they were in Jasper and Muskogee counties. What can I do to find out when and where they got married? That's a good question. Mm-hmm.
So when was their first child born?
Okay. What's another one? That's one thing you can look at, the indexes for both of the courts. So what's another thing you can do? It starts with a C. Census, that's it. So you can look at the census record to kind of get an idea, because you know what happens if you have 2 counties to look at. Do you want to spend all that time looking at both counties for the marriage records and all those books? I would, because you know you find other people, but that's just me.
Churches can keep marriage records too.
That's right.
When you said C, I was actually thinking of church.
That's another one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Some people don't have a lot of church records, but church records is definitely something to keep on that list too.
History and search.
Family Bible. We have a surname file downstairs that has copies of family Bibles in there. So maybe you go take a look at the surname file and see if there's mention in there as well. All right. My ancestor fought for the Confederate Army and died in 1925. How can I find out about his military service?
Cool.
All right, poll 3. So what resources? All right. Anything else?
Is if he had a widow, I didn't about it. Well, I guess that goes along with the pension thing. Yeah.
What about a death certificate?
Oh, I think that oral histories are, I was able to learn about my ancestors who fought in the Civil War just from talking with family members, like stories that have been passed down. And you know, you can't always be sure they're accurate, but I've been told very interesting family stories about the Civil War from my own family.
There's a lot of newspaper articles about those guys too, if they passed away.
Exactly.
They have a history, like the county history book, sometimes they include.
Very good. Yes, ma'am. Yep. Okay. Yep. Exactly. Yes, sir.
As far as Confederate veterans, there were also a lot of Confederate veterans. They were like fraternities after the war, and they would get together and have. They were like institutions, and they were like reunions, but they would have, and there are probably records of them too. They would have designated, officials, and they would get together and just, I guess, reminisce about their time.
That's a good one. Yes, ma'am.
You said that the National Archives has the military. Is that online? No, you have to visit them.
Yeah.
Okay.
You can also write them.
Yeah, you can write them. But yeah, you can go to their website and learn more about how you can reach out to them to get copies of records, because they only allow certain people to get it. So like when I got my grandfather's, I had to get my mom, and I use my mom all the time. So I had to get her to write for it so I can get it, because I'm not a direct descendant. All right, scenario 4. My family's oral history is that my great-grandfather owned several acres of land in Bibb County. He sold it and moved to Atlanta. How can I find out when he had the land and where it was? Yep. Tax list, yep. Say it again. You know what? Actually, that's a good answer. Muriel Jackson, she works at the genealogy room down at the Washington Memorial Library. She is a resource in and of herself. If you have not met her and you're doing Bibb County or Middle Georgia research, you have to go there, because the facility is awesome, but she is, even better. Yes, sir.
I just want to say that there are also, talk about where the land was, there are local maps that were not you can find local maps that were not necessarily ever officially published at that time they were made. They're just maps that people in the community made. They weren't like to show legal ownership, just maps that people have made from the community that show where people live. And you can find some of those at historical societies.
And to piggyback on that, Sanborn maps. For certain locations, they're the Sanborn fire insurance maps. They actually list the owners and some of the other institutions in that area that they cover. So last one, I found my family living in 3 different counties, but family oral history says that the family has lived on the same land since the late 1800s. How can this be if the census has them listed in 3 different counties over the course of a 50-year period? We've already answered that. So boundary changes. You wanted to say something? That's right. So Newberry Library has a historical atlas, and it's interactive, and it's really cool to watch. You can actually watch the county boundaries change over time. So that's a resource. It's not on your handout, but that's one that to consider. The Newberry Historical Atlas, and I'll bring it up afterwards. So one last thing. So we talked about, reviewing your records. Thomas McKenty, he has this movement called the Genealogy Do-Over. And essentially, he wants you to put all of that stuff that you've collected, put it to the side, and start fresh. Now, some of us, like, you crazy. I ain't about to do this because I've been at this a long time. But there is information about how you can do what they call a go over, where you can go over the records again just to see. But this is a resource. If you just Google it, it's a free download of his PDF. It's a resource. So I'm not, what's the word? I'm not advocating, I'm not endorsing, but he is a well-respected member of the genealogy community. And so that is a great resource to consider. And so all of that being said, this is me. I'm gonna close this out. I'm gonna go ahead and pull up the historical directory so you guys can see it. And I learned this from Mr. Steve, who's sitting in the back. So that's one of the things I picked up from him. And so this is the homepage. And so, of course, you can click on the state, and then you can view the interactive map. And then you can click to see how our illustrious state came to be what it is today. So we essentially were all the way to the Mississippi River. So that was all of Georgia. So I thought that was really cool. But anyway, are there any questions? Yes, sir. Well, to the Georgia Archives website. Here on the virtual vault, we have down here a couple colonial collections. So we have the conveyances. Let me make this bigger so you guys can see. So we have conveyances, we have the estate records, we have the plats and the warrants, and there's also some resources on family search as well. So it's just a matter of going to these resources and playing around with them. Like, we have 52 collections on the virtual vault. There may be something for you. We have pictures and a lot of other stuff. So if you haven't played with the vault, please take some time to do so. Yes, ma'am. Okay. All right. So we're 5 minutes into your lunchtime. So thank you. Yay.